worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make this event possible. First, my heartfelt thanks to Talia Berger, Director of Mosaic Law Congregation's KOH Library and Cultural Center, who has been working tirelessly from Los Angeles as she continues to rehab from recent surgery. Talia, we are deeply, deeply indebted to you and wish you refuah shlema. And please come home soon. Gratitude also goes to KOH co-presidents Dr. Dwight and Joanne Freund for their collaboration with me, and to David Poisner, our Zoom producer and Zoom security officer, for his time and his exceptional talents. A special thanks to Jonathan Lightman, a past president of our congregation, for his dedication to providing the pre-program music videos, reviewing the questions that some of you have submitted, and moderating the Q&A. And while Rabbi Ben Herman, the rabbi of our congregation, is out of town, I am grateful for his encouragement, as well as the support of Mosaic Law President Randy Pollack, who I believe is here with us this morning. For those wishing to submit questions, please do so in the Zoom chat by 10:50 a.m. to allow us to stay on schedule. A quick reminder, except for our guests and moderators, please keep your devices muted. Now I'm honored to introduce our special guest, Ambassador Jean A. Cretz, joining us live from Washington, D.C. On a personal note, the ambassador and I have known each other since kindergarten, growing up together in Albany, New York. Although he has graciously allowed us to use his first name, out of respect for this event, we will address him as Ambassador. Ambassador Cretz has had an extraordinary career. While his full bio is too extensive to cover here, you can find a more detailed version by clicking on the link in the Zoom chat. Allow me to share just some highlights. He holds a bachelor's degree in English literature from the University of Rochester and a master's in linguistics from State University of New York at Buffalo. He speaks several languages, including Dari, Urdu, Arabic, and Chinese. After serving in the Peace Corps in Afghanistan, he began his Foreign Service career in 1981 with postings in Islamabad, Damascus, New Delhi, Tel Aviv, Washington, Beijing, Cairo, and 2 subsequent assignments returning to Damascus and Tel Aviv. In 2007, President George W. Bush nominated him to serve as the first U.S. ambassador to Libya since 1972, a position he held for 4 years. Later, President Barack Obama nominated him to serve as U.S. ambassador to Ghana, a role he held until 2015. From 2015 to 2019, he was the Director General of the Multinational Force and Observers in Tel Aviv, overseeing the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. Currently, Ambassador Cretz is a senior advisor at Hamilton Advisors in Washington, D.C. His greatest pride, however, is his family. His wife of 43 years, Annette, their children, Jeffrey, a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force, and daughter, Gabrielle, who works in the private sector in Washington, and 4 precious grandchildren, William, Delaney, Maxwell, and Sheridan. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Jean Allen Cretz.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Reuven. It's wonderful to see you. I might also note that beside Reuven, there is Charlie Rebeck on today and Howard Aaronstein. We are all friends celebrating 69 years together. I was going to say something about my career, but I'm glad you did it. But someone did ask me what was the impetus to join the Foreign Service. And I'm going to say that I'm going to refer to Occam's razor, which, as all of you know, is that the simplest solution, the easiest solution is always the simplest. And that is because when I was in Afghanistan as a Peace Corps volunteer, people in the embassy used to invite us over, throw us a bone for a meal, and it was pretty good. And I said at that time, this isn't bad living. So I decided to join the Foreign Service. Let me start by making some comments about the region overall. If we look at the situation right now, the region is basically entirely scrambled. This is a region that for years has depended on people not miscalculating each other's intentions. And when they do miscalculate, we have major problems. As you all can see, this has been a bonanza year for miscalculations on several parties' parts. Israel calculated that Hamas wanted to govern, it wanted stability, and it did not want jihad, number one. Number two, Hamas, believing that after its attack on October 7th, that Iran and Hezbollah would open up a full second, third, and fourth fronts against Israel, which did not happen. Hezbollah believing that Israel would continue to carry out this tit for tat rocket exchanges, etc., they had over the last several years, but that Israel would not be serious about holding Lebanon as a full state responsible for Hezbollah's actions, which in effect Israel did, and which expanded the war in Lebanon, and which resulted in tremendous losses for Hezbollah. Israel, when it bombed the Iranian embassy in Beirut, believed that this action would not force Iran into a major retaliation, which was wrong, obviously. There were two retaliations by Iran on Israel, which thank goodness didn't cause the damage I think that Iran wanted it to. And also Iran miscalculating the power, the capability of Israel's military in the two raids that Israel conducted on Iran. The second one, of course, as we've seen reports, denuding Iran of its air defense capabilities and making it vulnerable to attack in the future. And finally, of course, everybody's miscalculation on how fast the Assad regime would fall. If we take a look at what are the, turning to Syria specifically right now, what are the interests or objectives of the main players? I would start with, let's say, for the main players, the stabilization of Syria and the prevention of a radical Islamist regime would be the main objectives. For the United States, I believe that our interests lie in protecting our Kurdish allies, basically from attack by our NATO partner, Turkey, keeping an eye on ISIS. As you've all seen in reports, ISIS population is about, mainly in jail, of 50,000, 10,000 to 15,000 fighters and family members. We need to maintain our contact with HST, the new rulers in Damascus. We need to find ways to marshal the international community to help rebuild Syria. And finally, I think it behooves the United States, after its lessons in Iraq, that we not move too fast to establish democracy. We certainly learned that establishing it from top down is not the way to go in Iraq, and it's going to have to be a grassroots effort as we move forward in Syria. For Israel, certainly there's an absence, the concern over the absence of a central authority in Damascus. While Israel had problems with Hafez al-Assad and Bashar al-Assad, at the bottom line, the border has been kept relatively free for the last 54 years or 50 years. Another concern for the Israelis, obviously, is the rise of extremist jihadis on its border. Right now, however, it seems that those newly empowered people in uh, Damascus, knowing that they're outgunned by Israel in any case, are not looking to deal or to confront Israel. Um, and Israel certainly, I don't think is going to be the current focus of HST for some time, unless Israel's currently quote unquote aggressive actions in Syria, that is going and seizing some land or occupying some land beyond the Golan, and also undertaking a widespread campaign of bombing in Syria to make sure that the weapons do not fall into the guerrillas' hands. If Israel can maintain or can stabilize that situation, and the new government or the new rulers in Syria don't believe that Israel is really going to take further actions, I think that Israel will not be the focus of HST over the coming months. I think also Israel has an objective to help build up and support the Syrian population on the borders. We know that the Druze and other Syrians in that area have had some good relations with Israel. And as we know, that Israel did provide assistance to Syrians from 2016 to 2018 across the border with medical treatment, et cetera. So, and then finally, the Israeli objective will be to somehow find a modus vivendi with Turkey, which has become, in effect, the second leading power in Syria next to Israel. So that's something that has to be watched. If we look at what are the questions and what is the situation that those with an interest in Syria have, we can say, number one, that they face a radical Sunni Islamic former al-Qaeda affiliate, which is now in power. They could impose a Taliban style of rule, but so far there are some positive signs with respect to HST. Number one, that they are trying to merge the various armed groups throughout the country. And number two, they have made outreach to religious communities, which is a good sign, because as you know, Syria is a patchwork mosaic of different groups, religious, Islamic, Catholic, Alawite, etc. Another problem that could arise that would stymie the objectives of any of the parties that have an interest in seeing a stabilized Syria would be a civil war among the various militant groups that now are vying for power in that country. There is a big problem in eastern Syria between the Turks and the American-backed Syrian Kurdish YPG military, which have links to the PKK, which of course is a very serious enemy for Turkey over the years, and which Turkey has been fighting all these years. If Syria, let's say, cuts its links to the PKK, that could be a positive element in all of this mix. If they don't, we might have a problem in that area as well. If Israel continues to back the PKK and the YPG militias up in Syria, it could provoke a sharp reaction from the Turks. So with Israel and Turkey now the dominant powers, given that Russia and Iran have been in decline, that is a situation that could go either way. And we hope that Israel and Turkey can find a way to resolve their differences. Another problem they face is, can they trust Jolani at this point? We don't know. The words have been good, the signs have been good, but we never know what pressures he's going to be under, and in fact, whether he is a wolf in sheep's clothing at this time. The Houthis are another issue. Iran seems to be able to maintain them as one of their existent proxies in this war, and that will be an issue that Israel will have to continue to deal with, as well as the rest of the Western powers and all those who depend on oil from the Gulf. Will Iran seek to reestablish its supply routes to Hezbollah in the midst of all this chaos. That the bottom line is that while Turkey may be a potential problem for Israel, Iran always lurks in the background, and Israel is going to have to watch very carefully whether Iran does make any moves in a sense to resupply its Hezbollah proxies in this situation. Jolani's biggest problem, as I mentioned, is the Kurds at this point. He has refused a federal kind of government, which would have allowed the Kurdish some autonomy. So that is a problem that has to be worked out as well. It's not clear, I think, to a lot of people why Israel has taken such an aggressive stand here with its bombings and with its occupation of land beyond the Golan. But that will, I guess, Israel will have to see how HST moves ahead with its policies before Israel can, pull back or establish a new relations with that government. For the big strategic picture, Iran has been weakened by Israel's attack and is now lacking its access of resistance. Russia is bogged down in Ukraine. Hezbollah has been knocked out, and it did not come to Assad's assistance. So Israel and Jordan are now on the same page in terms of not wanting a radical HST on its borders. So Jolani has a heavy task ahead of him, and this is what faces all the players and Israel and the United States and its partners as we seek to stabilize the situation in Syria. As Tom Friedman said the other day in an interview, Syria really is the crux of the Middle East, region. And as I remember when I was in Syria, they did call themselves, and others did call them, Qalb al-Aruba al-Nabid, which meant the beating heart of Arabism. So Syria does retain a very, very important and crucial part in that area, and it behooves all of us to try to work through all these issues that I've denoted. At this point, I'd like to go through some slides quickly, which I think you'll all enjoy. I'll go as fast as I can. David, if you're ready. The first slide, this is from Afghanistan. This is from the statue, in Bamiyan of the Buddhist statues, which the Taliban came in and destroyed when they took power. It was really a shame. This is such a gorgeous and important cultural relic. Next. This is a scene in Gaza with a former ambassador, William Brown. That little lake you see there is actually a garbage-filled waste area where garbage used to be piled into that. It had such a stench, it reached almost all of Gaza. And with US aid money, we were able to finally drain it and give people around that area some kind of life without that horrible environmental toxic waste. Next. This is my friend, Bashar al-Assad. I have to say that when I left Cairo in 2003 to go to Damascus as chargé, I was talking to President Mubarak, and he said to me, give the young man a chance because he's got to get rid of all those chains imposed on him by his father's assistants, all that the Alawi group that was left after Hafez died. And he was a charmer in the beginning, but as we say, something happened on the way to the forum. Next. This is Steve Forbes, who came to Tripoli for a visit with his brother, Malcolm Forbes. He came to our house for a discussion. And toward the end of the discussion, he left my house. He came back with his book, and he signed it to a most unusual diplomat, Steve Forbes. So I don't know what he saw in me that was unusual, but it was a lot of fun talking to him. Next. This is in Damascus in 1987. President Carter, who had obviously not been, who had left the office at that time, came to Syria. And if we have time, I'd like to tell a little story about him later on. Next. This is from the King David Hotel in Jerusalem in 1992. This was this huge snowstorm that enveloped the whole country, but I thought Jerusalem was particularly beautiful, and so we took that picture. Next. This is my colleague Norm Olson and I. We used to go to Gaza from 1991 to 1994. We used to go about 3, 4, or 5 times a week, and that was our beat to keep assess the situation in Gaza for our leaders in Washington. Next. This is a soldier on the Golan Heights. We'd taken our children to visit Quneitra. Unbeknownst to us, there were still some landmines in that field. So he got in the car with us and drove until we got to Quneitra to do a tour of that bombed out city. Next. It's a meeting I had with my other friend, Muammar Gaddafi. I didn't get to meet with him a lot of times, but this was a particularly long, we had about 2 hours together at this time. Next. This is a mural that was in the basement of our house. We rented a house from one of Gaddafi's cousins when I got there as ambassador, and this mural was in the basement. We had a hell of a time trying to get workers to get it out of our basement because they were so scared of what might happen. It took us about 6 months. It took us about 6 months, but finally we got it removed. Next. This is Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. He was at our July 4th reception, and prior to that, we would meet in the ambassador's residence, and he would have his favorite lunch, which would be 2 quarter-pound burgers from McDonald's with cheese, French fries, and a chocolate shake. Next. This was from the roof of the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv on Israeli Independence Day, when we used to watch the aircraft, the various aircraft of the Israeli Air Force fly over. Next. This is my family and I, my wife and my 2 children. We used to drive to Sharm el-Sheikh, and this was one of the islands in the Sinai that we would stop and just gaze at. It was just beautiful. Next. It's my wife and I in front of, I think this is the Queen Hatshepsut's memorial temple along the Nile. When you go on a Nile cruise, you would stop here. Next. This is the Rat Temple in Bikaner, India. This is a temple that we visited, and you take your shoes off, and as soon as you go there, these rats start climbing all over you. And then as soon as food is provided by the priest, they scurry to that area called the Lingam. It was quite a delightful experience. Next. This is the change of command ceremony at the Multilateral Force and Observers base in Sharm el-Sheikh. This is really one of the gems and one of the lasting pieces of the peace treaty that survived. Israel, Egypt, and the United States jointly perform this mission in the Sinai to make sure that both sides carry out the agreements as per their treaty. Next. It's another picture of the ceremony. Next. And a third picture. Next. I think that's it. That ends my presentation, I think, of 17 minutes.
Yeah. Ambassador, fascinating overview. I'd like to get the conversation started before Jonathan begins with the Q&A by asking you to comment about your time in Damascus specifically. From 86 to 88, you were a political officer there. during the regime of Hafez al-Assad, and then you returned in August of 2003, where you served as the charge d'affaires until January of 2004, before assuming duties as the deputy chief of mission during the regime of his son, Bashar al-Assad, whose regime was just overthrown 2 weeks ago. Anything unique you can tell us about Hafez and Bashar? Any differences in your
Well,
experiences in
yeah, I think first of
Damascus
all,
in the
one
80s
of,
and the early 2000s?
I think one of the things that Israelis, quote unquote, admired about Hafez was that he knew just how far to go in terms of the state of relations with Israel. I think Israel trusted that when Assad gave his word, the word was kept. Number two, so he knew politics, just like the other Arab leaders, such as Gaddafi and Mubarak did, until they didn't. One thing I remember, two things about Assad. Once, during the first year that I was there, we had broken off relations with Syria because of the attempt by Syrian Air Force intelligence to put a bomb on a plane flying to Israel. They had strapped it to a Palestinian had strapped it to his girlfriend who was pregnant at the time, an Irish girl, and the Israelis found it, and it didn't happen. But we and others kind of broke off relations for that year. And after a year, when the guy who was responsible for that was punished by Assad, General Vernon Walters was appointed by President Reagan to come to Damascus to restart the relationship. Hafez al-Assad didn't have a college education, grew up dirt poor in a place called Kardaha. And during the first hour of their conversation, he and General Walters conversed about the Boer War campaigns that took place at the end of the 19th century. So that was the end of the 18th century. That was a revelation to all of us as as they went back and forth on the different strategies of the British and the Boers, etc. Second, when President Carter visited Syria during that I showed you that picture, he was not in office, obviously, but when we were meeting with Assad, President Carter asked Assad if he would mind if he visited Kardaha, where Assad had grown up. And Assad was completely taken aback. Just what was this about? So we flew by helicopter up to Kardaha, this dirt poor place. And President Carter walked into this kind of one of the mud huts that some of the family was still living in, and said, I grew up in a place like this. Every member of the Assad family was in tears to hear that. So that was two very distinct memories I have of Hafez. Bashar, like I said, Mubarak said, give him time, and certainly in the few times that I met him, he was a charmer. And I remember that a congressional delegation led by, I think it was Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas, came to Damascus. And for the first time, they sat in a room with Bashar and they asked him questions, provocative, sensitive, controversial, and he answered every one of them with incredible skill and aplomb that no one had ever seen from a leader of the Arab world being so frank in his answers. So that was a very special moment.
What, what was it like being a Jewish diplomat serving in Damascus, in other Arab countries, and also um, is it unusual that there were so few American diplomats that served in both Israel and Arab countries? It seems like you were an exception to that rule.
Well, it seemed, after World War II, after Israel was created, I don't think it's any secret that there was a pro-Arab bias in the State Department for several reasons, including, of course, that the Arabs had oil and Israel didn't. So there were a lot of, in my generation of officers, several were number one. They had really were against Israeli policies in terms of settlement and in terms of occupation, which is one reason why they didn't serve. And number two, having a mark on your passport that or knowledge that you had served in Israel could affect your ability to serve in other Arab countries. So that I think that was one of the reasons why, even through most of my career, there may have been a handful of us who had served both in Israel and the Arab world. My view was that how can you understand a situation or a rivalry if you don't get both sides of the story, which I also felt was important, why I served in New Delhi and Islamabad, to get both sides of the story. And I think a lot of our officers missed out by not being in Israel and understanding the Israeli perspective as well as the Arab perspective. In terms of my own situation, in 1986, I was advised to carry a card with me that said, I am a Catholic. If anything happens to me, please contact my priest at such and such a telephone number. And I did carry that card around, as a matter of fact.
Did you give them my phone number,
Yeah,
Ambassador?
right. And then when I went back in 2003, the situation was entirely changed. People were listening to Kol Yisrael. People were reading Israeli newspapers. People were dying to get information about Israel. So there had been a sea change in those years, which made it very, very, very different. And I must say that the security for us in Damascus was not really a concern, because number one, if they wanted something to happen to us, it was going to happen. So I felt very secure both times in Damascus. They were fantastic experiences, and I'm glad we went through them.
Great. Thanks a lot. I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Lightman. Jonathan, I'm sure you have received numbers of questions. I know we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but I'm going to throw it over to you.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you, Ambassador. We've received a number of questions, which I have divided on the basis of the various countries implicated by the fall of the Assad regime, and we'll see how many we can get to. So you did mention Turkey, who is obviously one of the most significant players in this drama and has been described as everyone's favorite frenemy. Turkish President Erdogan has recently declared, perhaps we will invade Israel just as we entered Karabakh and Libya. So this two-part question is, how does Israel interpret Erdogan's bravado, and what is Turkey's end game in Syria?
Well, I think in terms of the bravado, Israel had wonderful relations with Turkey up until several years ago, when I believe one of the boats that was sent by Turkey was attacked by Israel. And since that time, the relationships had been downgraded severely. They used to conduct military exercises together. But since that time, obviously, there's been a weakening of the relationship. I think, hyperbole is hyperbole, but I mean, Erdogan has proven that he is not friendly toward Israel at this particular time. I don't know whether backdoor relations are going on, but as I mentioned here, I think Turkey's main objective, and I'm not a Turkish expert by any means, but it seems to me that their main objective in this and what they want is to terminate the PKK as an enemy, as a terrorist organization which can wreak havoc in Turkey, and number two, to make sure that the I think 3.2 million Syrian refugees return to Syria. Beyond that, I don't know what Turkey's objectives are. I would hope that they would be limited to those two kind of things.
Well, if we could ask a follow-up on that relative to American interpretation of Turkish intentions. You mentioned kind of in the same sentence, you talked about the United States having desire to see stabilization relative to the Kurdish population, and also referred to Turkey as our NATO partner. Moving forward, at what point does America say that Turkey is less interested in regional stability and should be considered from being expelled from NATO?
Well, I'm not a European expert either, but I think that would be a very, very difficult step for the United States to take because, Turkey has been a critical element of NATO's eastern flank. And despite, all the troubles that we've had in the past with Turkey, we have worked very hard to keep them on board as a NATO member. And I cannot foresee any situation, at least right now, that would force us or any of our other NATO partners to want to end that, terminate that relationship with Turkey. It's just too big, it's powerful, and I just don't see how that would further anybody's interest at this particular time.
Thank you. Let's moving towards Iran. With today's announcement that the Iranian rial hit an all-time low, how internally resilient do you believe the Iranian regime is?
Again, speaking as a layman, I from all I've read and all I've seen and all that's happened in the past several months, I would guess that the Iranian regime is facing a lot of internal dissent. Although the way that it was crushed a few years ago, shown that they also have the power to stop it. But as we've seen in Libya, as we've seen in Syria, as we've seen in other countries, when the people of that particular country have had enough of the repression and enough of a very bad economic situation, they take matters into their own hands. So I think it probably behooves the Iranian regime at this particular point to start making liberalization moves, or it could well face what happened to Assad and Gaddafi.
So also reported today, the al-Julani from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham announced that Iran would no longer have airspace over Syria. What do you believe the Iranian response to that will be?
I'm not sure what ability they have to counter that, because we know, number one, that the Syrians who have now taken over are not friendly to Iran at this particular point. And number two, Israel is watching this like a hawk. They do not want in any way for Iran to be able to reestablish any kind of support for its Hezbollah proxies, either by air or by supply routes through Syria, which they had before. So I think that's going to be a very big hurdle for Iran to overcome if in fact the Syrians do deny them airspace.
Moving to Russia, how will the retreat of Russia from Syria affect Israel's relationship with Russia, Ukraine, and perhaps Iran?
Well, it depends on what the new Syrian government does in terms of allowing the Russians to have access to the naval facilities and to have any other interest in the country. I think right now, given Russia's total preoccupation with Ukraine, the fact that we have a new American administration coming in, and the fact that Russia did not come to Syria's aid, gives us a pretty good indication of probably a limited role that Russia foresees for itself, at least in the near future, in the Middle East. I think they've got to deal with their other big problems.
Turning to Jordan, it was reported last week that Shin Bet Chief Ronen Bar and IDF Intelligence Directorate Head Major General Shlomi Binder secretly visited Jordan to discuss implications of HTS victory in Syria and concerns that extremists may undermine King Abdullah's regime. How do you assess the prospects that events in Syria may destabilize Jordan?
I think there's that when Jordan looks over at the situation in Syria, that they might see for whom the bell tolls in a sense. But I think the fact that Israel has established these close relations with Jordan, I think that there's going to be a very close relationship between Israel and Jordan, at least for the foreseeable future, as they work together to make sure that the outcome in Syria is one that serves both their interests.
So let's extend the question. If there's a concern about the destabilization of Jordan, is there a similar concern of the destabilization in Iraq?
I can understand the situation with respect to Jordan because there has been a problem. I mean, Jordan has always faced the problems of potential destabilization given its huge Palestinian population over the years. Iraq, I just don't know the situation well enough to know whether there would be any ramification or any consequence out of Syria for Iraq at this particular point.
Moving to Lebanon, with the weakening of Hezbollah and the fall of Assad, how do you assess the chances of the Lebanese state getting its act together for a more peaceful future?
I think if the Lebanese army can move down and occupy the zone between the border and the Litani River and can actually, prevent Hezbollah from gaining back territory there or, establishing a renewed presence. I think there'll be a lot of support in the Western world to help build Lebanon back up. But the key is going to be that the building up of the military and the ability of the Lebanese government to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't have the commanding hand in policies regarding Israel, et cetera.
Relative to the United States, can you please walk us through the contemporary American military presence in Syria and what role it may play if the country descends into civil war, or if HTS imposes a Taliban-style governance? On that note, President Trump had announced in 2019 that the U.S. was withdrawing American troops, but both he and Biden seemingly reversed that course.
Right. I think there are now something like 2,500 American troops in Syria, basically helping to protect or working with our Kurdish allies on the one hand, and to make sure that the ISIS threat doesn't reemerge. So I don't foresee a point at which, as long as there is an ISIS threat there, and which we believe could easily reconstitute itself, given their numbers and their experience, I can't foresee an experience where the United States, it would be in the United States interest to withdraw those troops. The impact of, even though it's a small group, it's a very powerful and very skilled group. So I think that under any circumstance, at least until Syria is really stabilized, I think that the U.S. will probably keep that group there.
Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said that Israel will remain in the newly seized Mount Hermon until, quote unquote, other arrangements are made, which is left undefined. Pending a miraculous turnaround in the Arab world where Israel is recognized and peace is prioritized, how do you assess the position of the U.S. on Israel holding onto this strategic site?
Well, I think that I mean, I'm not in the U.S. government, and my assessment would be that we would like, as soon as the situation in Syria is stabilized, hopefully there'll be a new agreement with the new government that will be established, and at that point, if Israel feels confident enough that it can withdraw back to the lines of 1974, I think that would be a very useful step. It also depends on the extent to which pressure is put on any HST government by the population when it comes to an Israeli quote unquote occupation of land beyond that disengagement agreement. So I think it's going to depend on how successful the regime establishes itself in Syria. Number two, how successful Israel is in brokering some agreement with that new government, uh, and the extent to which HST is pressured or not pressured by the Syrian population when they see or when they assess that the Israelis have occupied land that is not theirs at this particular time.
So you just referenced the 1974 lines with the role of UNDAF, the United Nations disengagement force there. Um, how do you assess their effectiveness, let's say relative to UNIFIL in Lebanon, and whether Israel would allow for the same administration by the United Nations to return if it cedes this newly acquired territory?
Well, I think that from the time that I was in Israel, I think the Israelis have been fairly have had respect for the UNDAF contingent on the Golan, and the border has remained peaceful for these last 50 years. So I think UNDAF still has a role to play. With respect to UNIFIL, it'll depend on whether or not they play an active role with the Lebanese military to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't have the free play that they did in that area from the Litani and south that occasioned this latest round and this flare up. So I think that UNDAF for sure, UNIFIL will have to prove its mettle again, I think.
Okay, so I have two more questions. Today's Jerusalem Post asks whether al-Julani has really changed, or if he's a clever politician who knows how to direct the right message to the target audience. And I know that you briefly touched upon this in your opening remarks, but what is your opinion?
Well, it's we're going to have to see. Like I said, is he a sheep in wolf's clothing or a wolf in sheep's clothing? I think from what I've seen of his interviews, he seems to be a fairly bright person. But we never know what the extent of the jihadi is inside the jihadi. I would hope that having learned the lesson, from the Taliban and from other countries, that he's going to put the Syrian interest first. He certainly is going to have backing if he does that, and if he's smart enough to see that he's going to have help as long as he turns in the right direction. I think we have to remain hopeful, at least at the current time. And like I said, he did make a few positive movements so far. So if that keeps up, we'll see. If not, it's trust but verify, as President Reagan said.
Okay, and our final question, and I know it does ask for a bit of speculation on your part, but given Syria's eclectic mixture of Sunni, Shia, Alawite, Kurds, Christians, Druze, and others, do you foresee Syria maintaining its national unity in 10 to 25 years down the line, or do you think it may descend into civil war and separation into different ethnic states?
I think that's all going to depend on what happens in the next few months and years, because the Assad was a member of the Alawite clan, and they have been despised because they've retained all the power since the ascension of power by Hafez in 1970, and they have really run the country. If the new leaders are wise, they'll try to incorporate all of the different groups in Syria, because if they begin to discriminate or to oppress Christians, Alawites, anybody, there's a whole slew of different races and religions in Syria. It's going to be very, very hard to keep it together. But I think if they make the right moves during these next few months and years, that it will be possible, because they'll see that there's an international support system that's willing to help them do that. But one can never tell, because These differences are long-standing. They're religious, they're social, they're cultural. And we really don't know how Syria is going to, react as a country after so many years of being dominated by this Alawite minority. We can just hope that they find a way to not turn on them as well as the Christians and others in the country. It's going to be a difficult, slog, but it can be done with the right leadership.
Thank you, Ambassador. Rabbi, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you to all who submitted your questions. We do have a few more minutes before we conclude. And I'd like, Ambassador, if you might comment a little bit on since October 7th. Maybe comment, if you will, on the various miscalculations since October 7th by all parties to that conflict.
Well, in the beginning, I think I said that everybody had made a miscalculation. I mean, Israel, maybe Bibi Netanyahu alone, believing that Hamas really wanted to govern. Hamas miscalculation, believing that they could, knowing that Israel's reaction would be severe, believing that Iran and Hezbollah would come to their aid in a full frontal war against Israel. Hezbollah believing that Israel would be happy with the status quo in terms of not holding Lebanon responsible as a state and just continue this back and forth bombings across the border. But then Israel decided that Lebanon should be responsible for this. Israel believing that its bombing of the Iranian embassy in March would not occasion a severe Iranian response. And Iran's miscalculation, I think, of Israel's prowess and technical ability to strike at it. And everybody's miscalculation about the Assad regime.
And I know you're not clairvoyant, but what do you think the future is for Gaza?
That place is just so tragic. Every time you think it's going to reach bottom, it goes to another bottom. Somehow or other, Hamas has got to give up whatever it retains as power or whatever, and there has to be a rebuilding of Gaza, but it's not going to be rebuilt by international partners until there's a stable situation there. I don't think anybody's going to be pouring in the billions of dollars that are going to be needed for that, because they've done that before, and there's been this cycle of violence. So somehow or other, we've got to find a way between Israel, the US, Europeans, and the Arabs to find a stable situation with respect to the Palestinians, and then to find a stable Palestinian Authority government that's not corrupt, that can rule in Gaza, that will have the respect both of the Palestinians and Israel. And then maybe we can begin to talk about a brighter future for Gaza.
I appreciate that. Thanks so much. Once again, my deepest appreciation to Ambassador Cretz. Mr. Ambassador, we thank you for your insights and for your dedicated service to our country. And I just want to say to you, may God bless you and your family with continued good health and long life. And thank you so much for being our guest this morning, I should say this afternoon in Washington.
Miami.
Oh, you're in Miami.
Yeah.
Well, let me just say, you're better off there. We're here in Northern California, and it was 40 degrees this morning. So,
thank you. It's been a pleasure. And I really, as I say, how could I say no to my friend of 69 years?
Ambassador, I still remember your bar mitzvah. Your parsha was Parshat Shmini.
That's right.
I don't know if you remember.
Of course
I remember it.
Of course I do.
I remember. Amazing. You still remember the opening verses
Yes,
of the
I do.
parsha. Well, give my best to Annette and to your kids, and
Thank you.
hope
It's been a
hope
pleasure.
hope we'll meet again, and just again, really appreciative. I just want to say to everyone before we conclude with the prayer for the hostages, as we do when we end these programs, as Hanukkah approaches, we're reminded of the power of light to dispel darkness and bring hope to our broken world. So I want to say to all who are celebrating, may your Hanukkah be filled with joy, warmth, and blessings. And to our friends in the Christian community, we wish you a season of peace and a joyful Christmas. We'll now conclude with a special prayer for the hostages. Please join with me in this prayer in English. And then before we sign off, I ask that you all stay with us for an inspiring musical video of this special prayer. Together in English, please join with me. As for our brethren, the entire house of Israel, who still remain in distress and captivity, whether on sea or on land, may God have compassion on them and bring them from distress to relief, from darkness to light, from servitude to redemption. At this moment, speedily, very soon. And let us all say, Amen.
אחינו כל בית ישראל, אחינו כל בית ישראל, הנתונים בצרה ובשביה, העומדים בין בים ובין ביבשה. אחינו כל בית ישראל, אחינו כל בית ישראל, הנתונים בצרה ובשביה, העומדים בין בים ובין ביבשה. המקום ירחם עליהם ויוציאם מצרה לרווחה, ומאפלה לאורה ומשעבוד לגאולה, השתה בגלה ובזמן קריב. המקום ירחם עליהם ויוציאם מצרה לרווחה, ומאפלה לאורה ומשעבוד לגאולה, השתה בגלה ובזמן קריב.
Sorry.